Hey everybody, and welcome back. In today's video I'm going to go away a little bit from what I normally do, and instead of computer work and things of that nature, we are going to be replacing the spark plug wire set as well as the coil pack for a 2011 Subaru Impreza. Now you'll see that this is going to be the hatchback model, but basically what we're going to be doing here is trying to fix an issue where the engine is currently misfiring. Now there's a little bit of maintenance that I already needed to do anyway, so I figured I might as well make a video out of it. So basically what we're doing is, instead of just replacing the spark plugs, which I have already done, we're going to be replacing the spark plug wires as well as the coil pack. Now if I'm not mistaken, for this model year it should be 2005 through 2011 for the Subaru Impreza. However, you may be able to match up some of the parts with some of the other Subaru models like the Forester. Now a couple of quick disclaimers. I do want to make a note that anytime you're working on an electrical component of the car, it's always recommended that you disconnect the battery, and also this video is for educational purposes only, so do everything at your own risk. Now, going into the actual part numbers themselves, so I purchased this on eBay, not necessarily my recommendation, but it was supposed to be a genuine part. So that's going to be the model number for the spark plug wire set, and then this is the coil pack assembly that I'm getting, or that I currently have. So for this model year of Subaru, you'll see that we actually only have one coil pack assembly here. Now, some of the newer cars may have a different setup. They could have two coil packs per two cylinders, or they could have that basically like the coil on plug, so it's a single coil per spark plug. But in this case, we just have one, which makes it a little bit easier, but also a little bit more expensive since we just have that one part for all four cylinders. So going through what we're going to be doing in this video, it's actually pretty straightforward. So you'll see we have the coil pack here. It's this black block that's bolted in. You'll see I've already loosened these bolts up, but just to show you what the part looks like out of the box. And this one did come with a little bit of bubble wrap, not a ton. But what we're going to do is dump this out really quickly, just so you know exactly what we're working with. So in this case, you'll see we only have 3 bolts holding it in. Now, before you do anything, my biggest recommendation, and I cannot say this enough because this is not something you want to mess up, is when you are removing the spark plug wires, whenever you get to that point, mark exactly where they are. It's easy to get confused because you pull the coil pack out and it looks like this, but when it goes back, it's easy to forget which wires go where. You do not want to go mixing those up. So I highly recommend marking it. You don't necessarily need to go off of what I have. Mine could not be correct. So you can also sometimes find the diagrams online. So basically what we're doing in today's video is we are really just taking out these bolts. They will not fall out. They're actually basically just built into the part. So we will remove this. We will remove the connector right here, and then we will remove the spark plug wires from each of these. And basically we will take the coil pack, put in the new one, and hook up the new wires. So relatively straightforward. If you just need to replace one of the two, then you can skip to the relevant parts of the video, but we are going to be switching out the coil pack first. So what we're going to do, I believe this is a 10mm socket or driver. So what we're going to be doing is loosening these up and taking this coil pack out. Now, what you can do, if it makes it any easier for you, so I was able to get to these 2 bolts pretty easily, but the one underneath is a little bit trickier. So if you want, you can go over to your air intake and you can actually unhook it, bearing in mind you need to make sure that you're aware of where you're leaving these cables. It's really easy to forget when you've unhooked something and just kind of leave that cable hanging. So you can unhook this, make sure that you're kind of tucking it away in a safe place. And then you can unscrew these just a little bit, and we can actually remove this housing right here and up into this point here. So we can take out our air filter, and literally you can just kind of pull this piece out. So 1 second, I'll move the video off. So you literally just pull this off, and this is actually connected down here to a hose, I believe. So you don't just want to rip this out. You can feel down here and actually pull this piece out, and then you should just be able to lift this right out. Now in this case, we'll keep these 2 parts separate and then move on to the next part. All right, so next up we are going to find the final bolt down here, and we are just going to loosen that up so that we can get this coil pack out and take a further look. All right, so we have taken care of this. Now, one thing to note here, we do have a couple of other parts. When you're moving or replacing any parts, especially when they're plastic in older vehicles, be careful because you may end up with damaged clips as you're kind of rearranging. But since we have this part here unscrewed or unbolted, you'll see that we have a single clip going into it that is much shorter, so you'll have about this much play, so you need to reach in there and pull that little tab so that you can get that clip out. Now, once you've done that, you'll be able to pull this right up and you can rest it in really just a safe place. And this is the point where you're going to want to make a note of which wires are going where. So you'll see we have two going into two cylinders here. And then if you follow the other two, they go into the other two cylinders, which are located just down here. So you're going to want to make a note, front, back, left, right, however it's easiest for you, just so you can remember which wires go where. Now, the way that I've memorized it for me, and it doesn't mean this is the right way for you, but when I'm looking at it where the top of the coil pack is right here, this is the front left cylinder for me. This is the back right, or the back left. Front right is right here, and then back right. So basically, if this were the engine, those are the corresponding cylinders. At least that's the way that it's been working for me. Now at this point, if you haven't already, I would highly recommend some kind of a glove to keep your hands clean. I also do not recommend doing this after you've recently driven your vehicle because it is very hot inside the engine bay and you can very easily burn yourself. So what we're going to do at this point is you'll see that down here we have each of these plugs. Now when these are installed, they should have dielectric grease on them, which is something I recommend when you do this. It helps to do a couple of things like preventing any kind of like short circuit type of event, but it also makes it easier to pull these out at a later date. So for example, if I were to remove this one right here, you'll see that we have a little bit of grease inside, which helps to ensure that this boot doesn't rip when it's being pulled off. You can usually get that at your local auto parts store. The grease itself is, I would say, maybe $1 or $2. And then the parts here, so this was about anywhere from $60 to $80 depending on where you buy it for the wires. And then the coil pack is about $130. Again, that depends over time, but again, we have those model numbers here in case you need them. So what we're gonna go ahead and do is in one swoop, so if you're just wanting to replace your coil pack, really what you do is you can place your new one in a safe place, and then you're simply going to put your dielectric grease on each of these, we'll just call them nodes. So you'd put them on each end on the inside, and then you're going to put it on the boot as well that you're removing and just install it onto this new one. So you can see these are identical. So I would just take this one off here, put it on right here, repeat the process for each of the spark plug wires, and then I would take this, get rid of it, and then I would put this one back in, making sure to install that wire that we previously removed, and then simply bolting it in and checking all the connections and making sure that they're good. Now, if you only need to replace your spark plug wires, then you're just going to follow a similar process. Basically, you pull the boot off, unplug the wire from down here, and then plug in the new one. Now with the wires, they should come in several different sizes, so you're going to want to match the size of the wire that you're pulling with the size of the wire that you're installing. So the actual length of the wire will matter for this, as will the actual wiring kit that you're using. Some of the ones that I used did not fit well, even though they should have. So just a quick note to make on that. So what we're gonna go ahead and do now is unplug each of these wires from this coil pack, and then we will unplug them from down here. We'll string these out to see about the sizing, and then swap everything in. All right, so we have gone ahead and taken off the old coil pack, put it up here. So I'm just going to put this in the box. Whenever you can, if it's possible to recycle at a local mechanic, I highly recommend doing that. And you'll see we have our wires off to the side, and then we can take our new ones. And most of the time, the wires will have this, I'm not going to call it shrink wrap, but it helps to keep them protected when touching any hot components of the engine. And another thing to note is a lot of the times the wires will actually have the number for the cylinder located on them. So you'll see this one right here says 1, and then as we go through them, you'll see this one right here says cylinder 4. So you can typically determine that based on the wiring diagrams online. Another, we'll just say shortcut if you're interested, what I do is I just take the wire and see which one's longer. For me, it actually goes kind of sequentially, so they go longer as I get further away for obvious reasons. So you can just kind of measure those out and see which ones are which. So at this point, what we're going to be doing is we are going to start replacing wire by wire. So as we find some of the longer cables, we'll string those out over here. And the shorter ones will keep closer to us. Again, we are only replacing 4, I should say. So you'll see that we have shorter ones on the left, longer ones on the right. And basically you just go one at a time, making sure that you're aware of which ones you're removing. So what we're going to do is we'll start with this one up front. So all you need to do to start is twist and rotate so that you can break that seal, because this is where your spark plug is housed. And then you basically just pull it straight out, and that's all there is to it. So we have this plug here, and be careful kind of pulling it around, and there may be some oil on there or grease, so make sure again that you have gloves if possible. But this is spark plug wire 1, so we'll go ahead and pull that one out, set it off to the side. I don't recommend throwing them away just yet, because if the ones you bought didn't fit, especially if they're aftermarket, you may end up needing to put the original ones back in, which is something I had to do. So just something to be aware of. Now, again, in this case, make sure you're checking your diagrams online. I believe with Subarus, we have cylinders 1 and 3, and then 2 and 4. I think it goes 1, 3, 2, 4, but you may just want to double check that online. Again, I kind of validate based on the length of the wire. The shortest one is this one here, which is the one that I just pulled. So this would be the one that I would go ahead and install, and I'm just going to repeat the process for each of these. All right, so I have the new one going in. When you push, you're going to want to push until you hear or feel almost like a popping noise, just to make sure that it's making that contact with that spark plug. So we'll repeat the process for this next one. Now, another critical thing for this is making sure that once you're done, you're routing these wires and making sure that they're basically, we'll just say not loose, not tight. So you don't want them to be stretching, but you don't want there to be a ton of play in them either. So again, we have the front one, the back one, front one, back one. So these two have been installed. We're going to double check them here, make sure that's connected, and then we're going to move over to this side. Now, if you're not doing the actual spark plugs themselves, you shouldn't have too much trouble. It is a little bit more difficult, but you'll see we have spark plug, which I think is 2 here, and we just pop this out. And again, you can just kind of wiggle this one free and pull this one through. And then we would repeat the process for the one in the back. So you can reach just past the battery, pop this one out, and then simply pull it through here, making sure that you've unclasped these carefully, because with time, those will crack. So there we go. Now, another thing to make sure of, especially if you've bought aftermarket wires, is make sure to test out the connection first and see if it actually fits and doesn't just pop right out. That's a mistake that I made personally after I had already unplugged and plugged everything in. But now that we have unplugged these two, let's go ahead and replace them with the remaining 2 OEM wires. All right, so I have those 2 wires run. What I'm going to do now is make sure the cables are managed appropriately. So basically just running through, making sure if there's a clip or a clasp that it is pushed in, and really just holding these wires in correctly. And then another thing to do is just double check, make sure that these are pressed in correctly. Now, one thing I mentioned earlier, but I didn't mention when installing these, is the dielectric grease that I referenced earlier should go on pretty much every side. So it will go on this side of the spark plug as well as this side right here, to make sure that you have safe, secure connections and you can actually break these loose without tearing this every single time. So basically, if you replace your spark plug wires now, and then 2 months from now you want to replace your spark plugs, when you pull these out, they're not going to rip or tear, and it also can help to prevent that shorting. So What we're doing now, I'm gonna go ahead, make sure that all of these wires are secured in each of their areas, and then we're gonna go ahead and install them on here and put everything back together. All right, so we have double checked all of our connections, made sure that all of the clips are set. Now what we're going to essentially go ahead and do, which I will need to pause for, is start working this back in, get that wire hooked up, and then really just tighten these bolts back and then make sure everything else is put back. So let's go ahead and I'll set the camera down, get the wire plugged in, and then just kind of get this back in place. All right, so we have worked it back into place with our plugged in. Now we're going to just double check and make sure that these wires are routed really just the right way. And then we're going to tighten everything in and check connections one more time. Now from this angle, you can see this bottom bolt here. You may need to do a mixture of hand tightening, especially for this one here if you don't have an adapter, because you may not have a ton of room, and it's a lot easier to really just hand tighten or use a wrench instead of trying to take out additional parts that you're just going to have to put back. Now, another reason this is especially important to double check wiring is during the process of reinstalling, any of these can slip off, so just make sure to double check connections once you're done tightening each of the bolts. So in this case here, you can get some pliers if you need to twist this one, because again, I don't have any adapters that will allow me to get this bolt started, only to get it finished with the socket wrench. All right, now that we have everything bolted in and our wires checked, we're going to go ahead and make sure that everything that we have removed or disconnected has been put back. Now, if you decided to move the air filter housing, make sure to remember any additional clips or wire clips that you may have disconnected. All right, final thing left to do is make sure all of your tools are cleared, batteries reconnected, and then we can go ahead and shut the hood and see if everything starts up. Let's go ahead and jump in. Now, this is the moment that most people either really love or really hate. Let's go ahead and see if she starts up. Couple things to note: if you hear any major, really bad sounds or anything like that, especially coming from the engine, or if you see a rough idle here where that needle is fluctuating a lot, immediately shut off the car, double check everything, and make sure it's plugged in correctly, because you could end up making things worse if you mixed and matched any of the cables for the spark plugs or really just didn't install something correctly. But as you can see and hear, everything's working correctly, so we are all set. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment box below, and I'll see you all in the next video.